Hello, welcome to Tuesday Business News Report. It's now time to bring you our feature on the show today as we focus on Nigeria's energy sector. With the latest that President Muhammadu Buhari signed the Petroleum Industry Bill 2021 into law. Now, this means it's the Petroleum Industry Act. This is coming weeks after the National Assembly passed the bill, and the Petroleum Industry Act provides legal governance, regulatory and fiscal framework for the Nigerian petroleum industry, the development of host communities and related matters. Now, the bill had remained at the National Assembly for more than a decade, with successive sessions of the Senate and House of Representatives failing to approve its provisions of sweeping reforms for the oil and gas sector. Now, by assenting, the president, possibly aligned with the position of the National Assembly, which proposes a 30% revenue allocation for the development of frontier inland basins that are mainly in the north, this more allocation to host communities, possible duopoly in the downstream sector, a 10% management fee, and other issues on production sharing contract as well as joint venture obligations. Now, in a letter to President Buhari, the Secretary General of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, Muhammadu Buhari, commended the signing, stating that the law will enhance the Nigerian petroleum industry's reputation, open the door to new investment, and also ultimately strengthen its position to meet the world's growing demand for energy. Joining me now to discuss this and much more virtually, I have Balazaka, an energy analyst. Good to have you on the Breakfast Show this morning.
Thank you.
Now, let's start off with this act. Despite the delay, it's somewhat timely as the investment outlook in the petroleum industry becomes a little clouded by efforts aimed at accelerating a lower carbon future. Furthermore, we also see that the new law would also help harness Nigeria's potential to achieve its program of raising oil production to at least about 4 million barrels per day, oil reserves to about 40 billion barrels, while we're also drawing on the country's vast natural gas reserves to provide clean and efficient energy. Do you share in this sentiment despite the mixed reactions we've had in the last 24 hours?
There is something that is very clear about the Petroleum Industry Act. When it was a bill, a lot of people have been waiting and analyzing. But most importantly, investors have been sitting on the fence. So everybody at the moment is very happy that the president has assented to it. But it is after going through the assented bill that many of us will come up with our respective reactions. Because while waiting for the president to assent to it, I knew that there were some T's that needed to be crossed and there are some I's that needed to be dotted. Now that it has been assented to, we will go through the exact document that has been assented to, and probably at that time there will be better comments and reactions.
And now this presidential assent, like you've also rightly mentioned, would also bring to the fore the T's and I's that ought to be crossed and dotted. Now, with the presidential assent comes the test of the capacity of government to implement this law, especially as it relates to the downstream regulation, and particularly looking at also subsidy removal at a time that we are calling for social cushions, because once we have this new phase, we are going to have quite a difficulty in managing certain situations. So what would be our biggest mistakes or blind spots that we would have to do? Because there's a test of the government's capacity to implement this law, because our eyes are fixed on all of the process that we ought to have.
There are certain things that we expect to see. But for me, regardless of the so many conditions that need to be satisfied, two criteria just have to be fulfilled or satisfied outside the many criteria that we expect. You see, when you talk about crude oil and gas, you are talking about an international commodity, and that means you will be dealing with both local and foreign investors. So the first criterion that needs to be fulfilled or satisfied is international acceptance, because you are dealing with an international commodity and you will be dealing with international investors. And apart from that, again, when you talk about foreign direct investment, you are basically talking about international oil and gas companies So if you satisfy that requirement, that will be excellent, because they will need to come in and contract. Then the second point has to do with what I can best describe as a criterion of local tolerance. Regardless of all the arrangements that will be made, or whatever may be contained in the law, you are going to be dealing with local communities, you are going to be dealing with Nigerians. So to a reasonable extent, what will be the way and manner host communities and other communities will be treated? What will be the kind of corporate social responsibilities that we are going to see? If you are able to satisfy the second criterion, then that means to a reasonable extent, everything about that act will flow seamlessly.
Thank you very much for your time on the Breakfast Show this morning. Balajaka definitely will keep our eyes fixed on the legal, governance, regulatory and fiscal framework and the provisions that this act would provide to help sanitize the Nigerian petroleum industry sector. Thank you very much once again for your time.